I'm Freeman Allen, and this is one of our sustainability dialogues sponsored by Sustainable Claremont with cooperation with Pomona College. This evening, as usual, we're going to be videotaping the sustainability dialogue, and after our presentation, we'll have an opportunity for people in the audience to ask questions. When you do have a question afterwards, if you would raise your hand, I'll bring you this microphone so it can get recorded on our videotaping. It'll be posted on Sustainable Claremont's website, and we hope that many people beyond this audience will have an opportunity to see it there. But the first thing I'd like to do this evening is introduce a very important person, Stuart Wood, who is the new Executive Director of Sustainable Claremont. Stuart earned a doctorate in political science at the Claremont Graduate University in 2014. His dissertation was on the intersection of communications, misinformation, and climate change. And he's spoken about that, the nexus of the media and climate change, at conferences in Ireland, Sweden, and Washington, D.C. We're fortunate that we have him agreeing to a proposed dialogue on May 6th, where he'll talk about what he's done in climate change. So I'm very much looking forward to that. That's still tentative, but I'm quite sure it will happen. He has also worked at the University of Laverne, where he is instructor in more than a dozen different courses, and he was also adjunct professor and created a course in environmental politics for the university. He's worked for a small business and for nonprofits such as Shoes That Fit, where he's had experience in many areas such as hiring staff and managing staff, grant writing, budgeting, and many things of that sort. You can imagine how important that is to Sustainable Claremont. We're just delighted, and we can't imagine how we could be more fortunate than have Stuart working with us. Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, would you like to say something about the things on the table?
Thank you so much, Freeman. Just really quickly, so happy to be here at Sustainable Claremont, and we're happy to be able to put on these dialogues with the community, and so lucky to have the support of elected officials and members of city government and the community to come out and learn about these sustainability issues. And so thank you all for coming, and thank everybody from the CPA for coming too. This will be a great event. Thank you. Thank you, Freeman.
Thank you. Well, as you know, tonight's Sustainability Dialogue, we're going to hear about the Clean Power Alliance, the fact that Southern California Edison customers in Claremont will now be customers of the Clean Power Alliance for their electrical power. Everybody is automatically signed on at 50% clean energy, but you have the option of transferring back to Southern California Edison if you like. We're fortunate this evening to have two people from the Clean Power Alliance to speak to us. Ted Bardacchi is the executive director, and he's held that position since February 2018. He was formerly the director of infrastructure in the office of LA County Mayor Eric Garcia. The other presenter, well, I think there'll probably be only one presenter, but the other person that will be at the front table here is Jennifer Ward, who's head of local government affairs for the Clean Power Alliance. And she graduated from CMC in 2011 and has in their environmental analysis program. And she's actually worked with Dick Haskell back in those days on water and water reclamation at the Claremont colleges. And from 2011 to the present, she's been working at Riverside, but has recently accepted the position at Clean Power Alliance. So I believe that Ted is going to make the presentation this evening, but they'll both be available to answer questions. Corey Kalaikai is also in the audience, as well as other members of the City Council. And Corey Kalaikai is our representative to the board, to the Clean Power Alliance, so he may have ability to answer some questions that may come up. We also invited a representative from Southern California Edison, but the message we got back was that upon discussion with our management and legal department, it has been recommended that we decline based on the fact that the City of Claremont has already elected to join a CCA. And so anything SCA does now proactively could risk a violation of a statutory code of conduct. The code of conduct limits SCE's ability to proactively communicate with you on this subject. I'm not quite sure what that means, but at any rate, I'm sorry to say Southern California Edison will not be here. So at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Ted and Jennifer, and you can use this microphone.
Here, I think they wired me up. Thank you, Fred. Thank you all for coming this evening. As Fred mentioned, I'm Ted Bardicke. I'm Executive Director of Clean Power Alliance. I'm celebrating my one-year anniversary with the organization this week, the founding Executive Director. And again, want to thank everyone for coming out. It's special for me to come to Claremont. Jennifer graduated from Claremont, but I taught at Pomona College for 6 or 7 years, back with Rick Hazlitt from the geology department when he helped start the environmental analysis program at Pomona. I taught we taught a class here called Green Urbanism and graduated a number of folks who are now real leaders in their own right in the environmental field. And so it's always fun to come back here to Claremont and speak to interested folks again. I also, again, mentioned Corey, but I do want to say that you're well represented on the Clean Power Alliance board. I'm a very active member and been really instrumental in helping us get to this point, which is very, very exciting. What I hope to do tonight is sort of give somewhat of an overview of Clean Power Alliance, talk about where we are in our enrollment, why we're being disruptive, why it might be a little confusing. Hope to clear up some any questions that you all have, but also if folks have interests or topics around the electricity sector and what's going on with climate change policy in California in general. I'm also interested in hearing what folks are interested in here in Claremont, because we are in the midst of a very important clean energy transition. Community choice is going to be an important part of that transition. And as folks know, we're in a bit of a crisis moment with climate change. And how that's all going to play out in California is a real live topic of debate in our local communities, in Sacramento in the state legislature with our new governor. And just interested in we do a lot of thinking and around that in terms of how we make this clean energy transition appropriate to our local communities and with local priorities in mind. And that's kind of where I wanted to start with this idea that Clean Power Alliance believes in a clean energy future that's local, where communities are empowered and customers are given a choice about their source of energy. And I just sort of want to break that down a little bit about what that means. Well, clean energy future, that is where we're going in California, whether we had a choice about it or not. But really the question now becomes, how do we do it? And the real belief, at least in the community choice aggregation movement, that that's going to be best done and also more broadly accepted if we keep it, if we empower the local communities and do it with local priorities in mind. And that another thought about the choice bit is that we believe that competition and will spur some innovation. It'll spur us to sharpen our pencils and do it as cost effectively as we can, but it'll also get us to think together about how we can do this better. And I already note that Southern California Edison, if many of you have seen, and they're not shy to hear me say this, has stepped up their game recently, right? You see them marketing themselves better. You saw them do the clean energy pathway. They're really ambitious about getting to 80% clean energy by 2030. I think that's absolutely within our reach. And a lot of people internally there have worked very hard on getting them to that. And I think that part of that came about because they saw choice coming. And I consider that, even just as we're enrolling customers, that there's already a victory there. That both of the energy choices that you have here in Claremont and across Southern California are driving in the same direction of really decarbonizing our electricity sector. And I think that sort of sometimes we forget that without that choice, they might not be making that same choice as well. So if we go to the next slide, just some basics. So we are a joint powers authority, 31 member agencies. We just had a 32nd member join, Westlake Village, who will start in 2020, including City of Claremont. It's about 3 million people on 1 million customer accounts. And the important part about a JPA is that we operate, we're publicly governed. All of our board members are members of our local city council or members of the boards of supervisors. But we also have to run like a business. And we don't get any taxpayer dollars. There's no recourse to anything but the rates that we get for selling electricity. So we're this interesting hybrid of public, nonprofit, business, and we're government, but we're a startup. And we're in this interesting position of being, like, usually you think of government coming in to regulate and sort of clamp down on competition, but we're actually in this part about bringing competition. And rarely do we think of government as a startup, but that's what we are, right? We didn't exist 2.5 years ago. And that's really exciting, and it means that we don't have it all figured out. We're still figuring it out, but we are going along this path of being sort of really good stewards of the public purse, because that's who we are governed by, and we don't have recourse to any other funds. I think the other thing to remember here is that we are one of 19 operating CCAs across the state of California. And you will see more and more organizations like us pop up. The California Public Utilities Commission estimates that by 2030, as much of 80% of California's energy load will be served by CCAs or by people generating their own electricity through solar panels or through another commercial program called direct access. So this idea of choice is going in this direction, so much so that in San Diego Gas and Electric territory, SDG&E is now trying to say voluntarily get out of the business of selling electricity. That utility has just said, we want to just operate infrastructure when it comes to electricity. And that's, part of this transformation that's starting to take place across California. Next. Many of you have seen this, if you've been paying attention to Clean Power Alliance, you've seen this graphic. So we buy electricity from private entities that generate power. We call them power purchase agreements. Some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term. The longer we're in business, the more of our supply is generated with long-term power purchase agreements. Those are cheaper and they drive down the price for customers. We essentially, through our customers, we rent the delivery system from SCE and sell it to the end-use customer. Think of it a little bit sometimes as like if you haven't cut the cord yet, like the cable company, right? So the cable company is sort of there with the wire to your house, but you have a choice of what kind of content flows over that wires and what kind of stuff comes over your television. So we are a content provider, and no matter whether you're a Clean Power Alliance customer for electricity supply or an SCE customer for electricity supply, everybody pays the same delivery charge. This is also the only place where the IOUs, whether it's the investor-owned utilities, make their money. This is where they make their profit. Here, the buying and the selling is just cost recovery. So they charge every year what they needed to recoup their costs for the previous year of selling electricity. So one of the things that we're bringing in terms of a transformation of the energy business is we don't have guaranteed cost recovery. It means we've got to be real sharp with our pencils. We've got to lower our risk profile. Whereas what has happened in California since the electricity crisis was we had a bit of what I like to call a bit of a devil's bargain. So the bargain was you IOUs, investor-owned utilities, will always serve everybody. There will always be power, but you get to charge whatever it costs you to buy that power. And that's why you see rates fluctuate every year. They go up, they go down quite a bit because whatever they had to spend is what gets charged next year, and they can recover their costs. And that's what happened this past year with some where Edison, had a budget shortfall of over $800 million. They misjudged the market, and that's why in 2019 people's rates will go up because they have guaranteed cost recovery. Next. So where are we in the launch process? We have been operating for a year now. We started out with 2,000 municipal accounts in unincorporated LA County. We then moved on to June in 2018. We enrolled about 34,000 non-residential customers in unincorporated LA County, South Pasadena, and Rolling Hills Estates. And those were the original 3 members of the Joint Powers Authority, and that's why they kind of went first. And so we've been serving, regular business customers, 34,000 of them, since June of last year. Things have gone quite well. You'll hear me talk about something called an opt-out rate. So what level of people deciding to stay in. We had about a 98.5 participation rate among those 34,000 customers, about a 1.5% opt-out rate. And so those folks certainly were seeing the value proposition, and we've kept those customers pretty well over time. So February 2019, service launching for all residential customers. So how this works is that people cut over on their meter read date. So let's say you, in February, you had a meter read date of February 5th. That means that on February 6th, if you remained in the program, if you didn't opt out, beginning on February 6th, you became a Clean Power Alliance customer for your electricity. You remained an Edison customer for your delivery, for your lines and your wires, but for your electricity supply, that cut over on the meter read date. And that means that your March 5th meter read date, so that would be like tomorrow or the next day, that'll be your first month of Clean Power Alliance service, and your bill that'll come 6 or 8 days later will look a little bit different. And Jennifer handed out some understanding your bill. What you will see on that bill is that you will have a delivery charge, which you always had from Edison, and then you will have a generation charge, which you always had from Edison. But now that generation charge will say Clean Power Alliance. And that's the part of the bill that goes to us for your electricity supply. And so when we talk about setting rates, that's the rate that we set. And you'll see it appear. It'll be on a different place on your bill. But the overall bill will still come from Edison. We've in this rollout, we've found that sort of the number one concern, the number one objection, the number one thing that people get upset about is this idea of automatic enrollment, right? That you're automatically enrolled into this new service. Nobody asked you, like, what did I want this? So a couple of things about that. The first of all is the legislation that enabled CCAs to exist and still enables them to exist sort of sets it up that way. And the reason it set it up that way was that the CCAs were formed in the aftermath of the California energy crisis. The enabling legislation came in 2002. And the idea was that maybe local governments who band together can manage risk more because they're closer to their constituents, and that they're more transparent and not sort of going to be set up to be making bets in the market, that they would actually be more conservative. But to make that happen, you had to have a mass of customers. So remember, the CCAs come out not of green or sustainability or climate change, but the original idea comes out about reliability and less risk and being closer to constituents. Now, in 2010, just as the first CCA was really getting off the ground, there was a ballot initiative, Prop 16, statewide ballot initiative, put on the ballot with the financial backing of PG&E. They spent $45 million on it to change that law, to change the automatic opt-in. And the state, voters across the state were given an opportunity to change how that system worked. And it was defeated. They outspent the proponents by about 45 to 1. And so ever since then, this has been the way that CCAs have worked. And we, again, have found them to be quite popular. Most CCAs have what we call opt-out rates of between 2 and 10%. And that is sort of stays over time. It's proven to be a very sticky model in terms of once you get through the enrollment, people tend to like it and stick with it. So in May, we'll do the same thing with with non-residential customers. So this is businesses, institutions like the Claremont colleges, small business, NGOs, anybody who's not a residential customer. And they'll get this, 2 notices in the mail beforehand, and then there'll be this cutover month, and then they'll get 2 notices in the mail after enrollment, just like the residential customers are getting right now. Next. So as Fred mentioned, one of the unique things about Clean Power Alliance is that within the choice of saying, well, am I going to get my electricity from Edison or am I going to get my electricity from Clean Power Alliance, is we also give you choices of rates, and we give each local community a choice about what their default rate is. If you do nothing, what happens, right? So if you do nothing, what happens is in Claremont, you're on a rate that essentially is parity with Edison. You should not see a bill difference in terms of if you had been that same month using the same amount of power with Edison, your bill would be the same with Clean Power Alliance. So why go through all the trouble? Well, our Clean Power product has 50% renewable content, which means between 16 and 18% more renewables and a lower GHG footprint than the Edison's base product. Now, Edison also has a 50% renewables product and a 100% renewables product, just like us. They are much more expensive. They're at least 5% more expensive than our 50% and our 100% product. They also have not had much uptake. Across Edison's territory, there are probably less than 1,000 customers who have chosen one of these other sort of higher renewables products or rates. We're gonna exceed that by leaps and bounds. Clearly, with a lot of cities, in fact, the majority of the cities and the majority of the counties in Clean Power Alliance chose this 50% renewable energy content, the clean power content. So people have this choice to first, are you in or you out? Stay with Edison or stay with us. And then within that, if you stay, then you have the 3 choices. The lean power, which is a little bit greener and a little bit cheaper. The clean power, same price, better product. And the 100% green power, which comes at a premium, but is 100% renewable energy and 100% carbon free. And that's sort of the choices that we're offering. Let's go ahead at the next one. So just wanted to show a little bit about sort of where we are or where you all are in Claremont right now in terms of what people are choosing to do. What's very interesting is there's been a lot of engagement in Claremont about this transition. You have groups like you, but sort of just, I would just say, a highly aware and engaged population, which is really sort of exciting because what do we see in the numbers, okay? So I see a couple of things in the numbers. One is I see a higher opt-out rate in Claremont than what is all of CPA territory, okay? Right? So not that much, it's like 2%, it's not even double, but it's a little bit more. But you also think, okay, if there's 11,000 customers, almost 12,000 residential customers, and 4%, that's what, 400 people, is that right? Where's my math? 500, what? There we go, 523, it was right there. Okay, so that's, if you're, I think, I joke, if you were an elected official, you'd be winning in a landslide, right? So folks, get really fixated on this number. I'm actually interested in this number up here and this number here. Because what it means is if you look, 0.21, like that's compared to what other folks are doing. There's a lot of people in Claremont who are choosing to opt up, actually choosing to spend a little bit more to be a little greener. There's also folks who are, again, more than most, who are choosing to say, I want to save a little bit of money. And so I think I find this interesting that, and you see this across the territory, that the more opt-outs you get, also the more rate changes you get. And so for me, what this is saying is that there's an engagement level with this transition that I think is positive and healthy. I don't think there's a competition about opt-out rates, because what we need from a business perspective is once we get through the transition, whether the opt-out rate is 2% or 4% or 8% or 10%, what we need to do as a business is once we get that customer base is keep them, right? Our long-term risk as a business is customer defection, okay? What we need to do is we need to deliver on the value proposition going forward that our customers like us, they like what we're providing, they like how we engage with the community, they like the investments we make in local projects, they like that the CEO will come and talk to 30 people on a Monday night in one of our member agencies. That there's this connection with your electricity company that you might not have had in the past. You can go, if you want to talk business, you can come to me. If you want to complain, you can go talk to Corey. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is that what we're interested in keeping as many customers as want to stay, but really what the value proposition going forward is keeping those who have decided that they want to be with us. So a couple of things that we've got is, so the opt-out period, you can opt out at any time. There's different provisions about opting out. But one of the things we do offer our customers is the ability to change their rate. If they're with us, they can be lean power, clean power, or 100% green power. Maybe you wake up one morning and you're just like, oh my God, I want to do something about climate change, but it's like raining and I can't ride my bike. Maybe I'll opt up. Or something happens and you decide that you need to save some money. We allow that switching pretty much at any time. And it's one of the benefits of being large is that we can live with some of that uncertainty about what customers might do 1 month to the next. If we had half of our customers opt down 1 month, well, that would be a different story. But that just doesn't happen, right? The individual choices happen slowly and over time, and we're big enough to manage that kind of change. So on our website, you can opt out, or change your rate. Let's keep going. We also have a bill calculator, which helps folks see, you enter the rate and your electricity usage from your last month, and what would pop up is a comparison of what that would look like on our 3 rates versus what it would look like on Edison's 3 rates, the 50% and the 100%. We found this to be extremely popular. It debuted only in sort of mid-December. Close to 30,000 hits on this calculator, on this page of our website. People really like to go and just check us out. and see that the numbers that appear are actually true to the numbers that we're promising. I want to talk a little bit about the 100% green power. So it is a little bit more expensive. It's 7 to 9% more expensive. But it's an investment in more renewables. And how does that work? The investment in more renewables means that the way we purchase renewable energy is we aggregate all of the individual choices among all of our customers to say, okay, that's how much renewable energy we're going to buy as a system in the next year, and how much we're going to invest in new renewable energy over time. If a bunch of customers opt up, it sends that signal, we got to buy more. Customers opt down, it means, well, we're going to buy a little bit less. And so the sum total of all of our customers' individual decisions about how much, what product they want, leads us to buying more or less renewable energy over the course of the year. And at the end, I want to talk a little bit about what those kinds of projects might look like. There were 10 cities that, believe it or not, decided to have their default rate be 100% renewables. So that was 5 cities in Ventura County and 5 cities in LA County made that decision. I was a little terrified of them making that decision because that implied a rate increase. And it's a rate increase at a time when there's all this other sort of confusion around. But if you go back to the opt-out numbers, what we're seeing is the opt-out rates in the 100% green power cities it's higher than these others, but it's not that much higher. It's kind of like double our overall rate. And it still means that 95% of the people are sticking with it. Now, they haven't gotten their first bill yet. So ask me in a month or two, and we'll see if this number holds. But just out of the gate, what we're seeing is the reason for opt-outs is just a whole different kind of host of reasons, and it's not necessarily connected, first and foremost to price. It's a little higher, but here's some weird anomaly. Like the cheapest cities have a higher opt-out rate than the middle cities. Something else is going on here that we're gonna, once we get through our enrollment, we're gonna open source this data, and if you have economists or sociologists or political scientists or psychologists who want to do behavioral stuff, we're gonna provide this data of what happened in aggregate to folks, and we're super excited to see what the behavioral economics types of folks come up with when they run these numbers. Let's keep going. I talked about what it means to deliver on the value proposition, to keep our customers, the customers that stay with us through this enrollment period. And really what we're talking about is 3 kinds of values here. We've got stable competitive rates. I talked a little bit about the difference of the business model. Our rates hopefully will not over time like rise and fall and be this kind of thing, but it'll be a little bit more flat, if people have questions about that, I can answer that. We're obviously offering higher renewable content. If these opt-out numbers and these things stay stable over our enrollment period, in 2019, we will be providing 60% renewable energy, about 70% carbon-free, which is meeting the state's SB 100 goals 11 years early. And that will only focus, let us be a signal to invest more and more and get new steel in the ground and new renewable energy projects. And then local management and control, I talked about some of the transparency, some of the dialogue with our communities. And then as we go forward, we will generate excess revenue, which we need to cover our costs, to build up financial reserves, to be a stable institution, but then also to start to invest back in our communities. And that's through a range of potential local programs that the board will help guide the priorities of, and we will figure out how to implement above and beyond what Edison is already doing, particularly in the energy efficiency space. So we probably won't be too much in the energy efficiency space because they have that pretty well scoped out. But ours will look at transportation electrification, how can we foster more electric vehicles, and building electrification. Those two things help reduce our overall GHG, but they also have a really important impact on public health and on air quality, because it's the burning of fossil fuels in our cars and the burning of fossil fuels in our buildings that really sort of drive a bunch of our local air quality issues. The other things that drive our local air quality issues as it comes to energy are our local peaker plants. And you have not far away in Fontana, you have Mountain View, which for 6 of the last 7 years was the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the state of California in the energy space, the Mountain View generating station. The thing about that plant is that it ramps up and ramps down, and other plants around the LA basin, they ramp up during the evening when the sun has gone down and maybe the wind hasn't started to blow yet, and we need gas capacity. The thing about those plants is as they ramp up, it's the ramping up process that increases local criteria air pollutants. It's that moment when they're firing up and they're burning a lot of gas and they're sort of just warming up that is the worst air quality emissions from those plants. And it's right in the 5 to 7 p.m. period. It's also when we've got lots of traffic. It's when that local air quality gets the worst. To the extent that we, thinking about this and wanting to improve our communities, can start to invest in battery storage in areas where we can reduce that ramp. I'm not saying we're going to get rid of those gas plants. That's still decades away. But if we can reduce the time that they ramp, the number of times they ramp, sort of start to push that down a little bit, we will have a significant impact on our local air quality, which I think is a real sort of local priority in Southern California. So how are we going to do this? So right now, at our last board meeting, we talked about how are we going to meet this renewable energy demand. So right now, we're meeting it mostly through short-term energy contracts. We did sign our first long-term deal last October, and that is a wind deal that is delivering energy now. But we shortlisted 9 projects for long-term renewable energy projects. It's approximately $1 billion in potential clean energy commitments over the next 15 years. So this is, we're big. We'll probably, we'll be the 5th largest electricity utility in the state come June. And that means we're going to be making, big investments in expanding the renewable energy capacity in the state of California. And that's, that's an important thing if we want to meet those SB 100 goals to do that. But the one important thing is, so right now, renewable energy projects, the prices that we get are cheaper than what we buy natural gas produced energy for. The quicker that we can, in terms of $1 per megawatt hour, the quicker we can bring these long-term projects on, the more that premium shrinks between the 100% green rate and that clean power rate. The overall, if we could get all 9 of these projects up and running, that would be $40 million a year, or a 5% decrease in our procurement costs. Okay, this, you may read, oh, renewable is cheaper now, and you may be skeptical. Like, we see it in the numbers, and we will see it in our procurement costs. The faster we can make those long-term investments, as opposed to buying short-term renewable energy from projects that already exist. And then we've got local programs strategic planning process that's going to kick off in April or May, depending on when I can get the contract together. That'll look at what are we going to do about transportation electrification? What are we going to do about building electrification? What are we going to do about battery storage? How are we going to invest in our local goals such that, again, that we deliver on the value proposition and keep our customers. We're also going to look at the feasibility of what can we do to get more energy capacity built locally. There's a lot of value in that in terms of reducing the need for grid infrastructure and new investments. We can save a lot of money that way in the system overall. But they're also generally more expensive than these bigger projects that we can do out in the desert. And so that's going to be some of the things that the board has to wrestle with, our policymakers are going to have to wrestle with is, how much do we keep rates down? How much do we build up reserves? How much do we spend locally? All of these are, once we get through this transition, some of the really interesting policy choices that our board and this institution that we're building is going to take place. And that debate's going to take place out in the open, publicly, and hopefully with the input of as many of you who want to start to get involved. So that was a lot. But I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about how, what we're thinking about going forward once we get through this enrollment period. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think you answered it on one of your slides.
Yes.
My husband uses a CPAP machine, so
Yes.
we have the medical baseline.
Yes.
And that was a concern. Will that be affected? And you say that those of us who are on that, who get 100% green power, will do so at no additional cost?
Okay, so there's two bits. So the first one is that discount, the medical baseline, that will remain intact. So the extra baseline that you get on the extra tier 1 stuff that you get, that will all remain intact. That won't the amount of that won't change. The note on the folks for the 100%, that was in the cities that chose the 100% default. So if you opted up in Claremont and you were on CARE or FARA or medical baseline, you would have to pay the additional charges above and beyond the 50%. And I'll say why that happened. The 100% cities were very interested in going, in going 100%, but they also they were a very, socioeconomic diverse set of cities, and they wanted to figure out how to protect low-income customers in case they didn't sort of get it to opt down. And we didn't want to put us in the position of renewable energy and 100% green and carbon-free, only accessible for the wealthy. We wanted it to be accessible for all. So the rate, the 100% green rate in those default cities has actually a little subsidy in it, so that every CARE and FARA and medical baseline customer could get that same carbon-free product without paying any more than they would have otherwise paid to Edison, including their discount. So that was a slide that was mostly referencing that 100% tier. But you will still get your medical baseline discount here.
I'm somewhat confused about those of us who generate
Yes.
our power? Because it sounds like it costs more to have full solar power than it would if we didn't. The charge, there's no point. Is there any point in saying, well, we want 100% if we generate more than 100%?
So if you are a net generator, like over the course of the year you generate more than you use, your rate is unlikely to matter. What you will get is at the end of the year, you'll get what's called net surplus compensation. And we do pay 10% more than Edison does for that net surplus compensation. So up to 100%, it's just like your existing net metering system. But then for the above 100%, we're going to pay you 10% more than Edison would pay you for that extra. We're administering the program. How many folks here have solar? Oh my goodness, okay. So we need to do a little NEM primer, net energy metering primer. So we are administering the program a little bit differently than the way Edison does. One of the things that we've heard from many, many customers, and this is across the CCA movement, is that for folks who, the majority of the folks who did solar mostly did it to, and this is increasing number of customers, mostly did it to get their tier 3 and tier 2 charges off. They didn't do it necessarily like you to be generating 100%. And so what happens is you get an annual true-up bill that can be surprising to many people. $500, $700, $1,000, $1,500. You get on your bill every month, it sort of says where you are, but people don't really feel where they are until they get that annual bill. And that's going to actually, the number of solar customers for whom that is a reality is going to increase in California dramatically over the next several years, because we just passed a law in the state, the CEC passed a regulation that says all new home construction has to have solar beginning in 2020. So okay, so you're a real estate developer, you're given this new regulation, I gotta put this thing on the customer's roof. They're gonna put the smallest solar system possible. Most of them will do that. And so most solar systems in the state, the new solar systems, will be sized to just cut off that peak amount, and people are gonna get hit with an annual bill. We administer our program a little bit differently. The way we do it is we do a monthly settlement. So if you have a credit, it'll roll over and just like now and suck up your next charges. But if there's a charge, we're going to charge you that. And then during the annual settlement, if you're still have credits, we're going to refund you that money that you paid. And if you were a net surplus compensation, we will pay you that extra. But it's a way of making sure that people don't get hit as solar becomes more and more ubiquitous, that people don't get hit with that big extra charge or that big annual charge.
One follow-up question: if we generate all the power that we use, we get funds back. But is there any reason to sign up for the full power? Because
for the 100,
we'd pay more.
Yeah, it will come out in the wash. It won't have much of a difference in terms of what it will mean is in the months that you owe, you will pay a little bit more, and then in the annual true-up, and in the months that you generate, you'll get a little bit more credit because you're going to get credited at that higher rate too. And then at the end of the year, it won't really have mattered whether you were on the 36 or the 50 or the 100.
Will you be using SCE's rate schedules? Or does that change completely? Like what I'm referring to is, for instance, people who signed up for solar with net metering 1 a couple
Yes.
of years ago.
Yes.
You generate 6,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year.
Yeah.
You consume that amount, basically you have a bill of $12 a month.
Right, right.
But today, if you go on solar and you consume 6,000 kilowatt hours, and you generate that amount, your bill basically doesn't change at all, because they're going to charge you 3 times as much in that window between 4 and 9 p.m. when solar produces almost nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Do you have any influence over that? Does that change with you?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So the first is net energy metering 1.0 versus net energy metering 2.0. We grandfather the net energy metering 1.0 folks the way Edison is doing it. So if you're a NEM 1.0 customer, you get to keep that. The time of use periods that are now switching from 12 to 6 to 4 to 9. In this initial rollout, we are also going to mimic that change in the time of use, but we're not locked in stone for that forever. And the point being is we have 2 things that are really within our control as a community choice aggregation, as a CCA, where we don't have to go to the PUC. We have procurement authority and we have rate-making authority. And those are sort of when we get into the politics of this, those are the swords we die on, right? If we can't buy the power that our customers want, and we can't charge the rates that the board decides, then there's no real reason for this. So we expect, once we get through this enrollment and the first year and things settle out, we do have the ability to change, alter the time of use periods, the rate structures. Corey, also sits on the board of, or you're still chair of the board of Foothill Transit? Okay, so here's an example. Corey is the chair of the Foothill Transit board. Foothill Transit doing amazing stuff with electric buses, right? We think that we would love to have those electric buses powered by 100% green, carbon-free energy, right? Right now, some of the rate structures, in particular some of these times of use changes, make it much more expensive for Foothill Transit to run those electric buses. We can, with our rate-making authority and our ability to change those rate structures, can start to incentivize things without asking for permission from the PUC in San Francisco, start to incentivize some of those social goods that we would like to see, and start to use some of these overlapping, particularly with public agencies, use some of these overlapping policy goals to move us quicker down the path. So if you think this is complicated now, imagine having tried to monkey with time of use rates on top of it right now, and to have to try to explain all of that too. So we will, in this transition period, be mimicking that change. And then when we see what our customer base is, see what people are interested in, see what we can afford, I think there will be some strategic tinkering or decoupling of our rate structures with those provided by SCE. Yes. Oh, no, we've got there. Yeah.
Hi. This is a slightly different topic,
Sure.
but since you said you want to incentivize green energy, I'm currently awaiting one of the SCE rebates for a clean air vehicle.
Okay.
So what about residents who, is that still going to be through SCE, or will
Yeah.
you be offering
Yeah,
that?
so all of the current with the exception of a couple of commercial incentives, all of the current rebates and incentives that Edison offers will remain intact, particularly for the clean air vehicles. Those the funds from those tend to come from basically one of two places. They come from either the cap and trade revenue, and the legislature has decided and has used the utilities as a pass-through and a mechanism because they touch everybody, or they come through what's called the public goods charge, which is a charge on your electricity bill. It's usually about 25 cents a month that goes into a fund that then is redistributed for incentives and programs. So because even though you're a Clean Power Alliance customer, you will continue to pay that public goods charge, it means you have a right to receive those programs that funds. CCAs have the ability to go and apply to run programs funded by the public goods charge. It's something that we're very interested in because, as any of you who's had an experience with a utility incentive or rebate program, it can be clunky, and sometimes the bureaucracy around it is pretty high. And we're government. I'm not going to promise no bureaucracy, but I think we can be a little bit more nimble. The CCAs that have chosen to apply for and get and administer those public goods charges have proven quite successful with them. So again, another value proposition going forward. But the existing rebate for the clean air vehicle, an energy efficiency thing, those sorts of refrigerator rebates, those kinds of things all remain intact. Yes.
If you add on-site battery storage
Yes.
to the solar panels, does that affect the building at all? Because you probably would not see time of use variation.
So you will see, because of the change of time of use, what you will see in the on-site generation business is batteries suddenly become a lot more cost-effective from a bill perspective. So the solar developers and the solar providers who I meet and talk to these days say that they're selling for their new solar systems, depending on the vendor, between 10 and 40% of their new systems are also, they're upselling batteries, and they're getting batteries in, and a lot of it is being driven by the time of use. Also, batteries are systems are falling, the price. So I definitely see that. So the short answer is yes, that's a way to help mitigate. The long answer is I think it's really going to be a great thing if there are more and more and more people who have solar and batteries, because we, as an electricity company, there's a lot of times that those batteries are just going to be sitting there. And they're going to be fully charged, and you're not going to actually need the energy in there. Well, I really could use some of that energy in that expensive time of the day, or I could use some of that available capacity out there to meet reliability needs. So there's this, 5 years down the road, as more and more people get batteries, we're going to start to see those batteries get connected. And we're going to start to see them. And when you're a Clean Power Alliance customer, we'll start to say, okay, will you and you and you and you and you and you and you all maybe 10 times a year agree to sell me that energy when demand is really high, and I'll be able to sort of have an agreement with you to discharge your battery and send it back to the grid. And it's one of the sort of exciting things about sort of having an electricity supply-only company that's somewhat differentiated from operating the lines and the wires. Like, this is our business, right? Our business is buying and selling power and figuring out how to do that in the most nimble and cost-effective way. So we're like hyper-focused on that kind, on seeing that kind of innovation come forward. Yes.
Hey, Ted. Thanks
Hi.
for being here.
Yeah.
I've been in the solar industry for about 5 years
Okay.
now. I want to circle back to the time of use, which
Yeah.
is a great question. So it's kind of my understanding that all tier plans by the end of 2020 will be switched over to a time of use plan. And for existing people that are on time of use plans, they may get a 5-year grandfather. But ultimately, the new time of use plans as of March 1st, which has everyone kind of, opening their eyes,
Yeah.
is like, whoa, solar just became not as affordable, kind of. So is some of that information correct?
Yeah, so this is our, so what's happening on, let's start back. So most commercial customers right now are on some kind of time of use period. Big energy users. And what's happening in March is our time of use periods are changing, okay? So right now, the peak period is from 12 to 6, which is when electricity used to be really expensive and are high demand. But now because there's so much solar, that's no longer the peak. The peak is now 4 to 9. So that's shifting. And there's two things going on there. One is just like the incredible amount of solar that has been developed in the state of California and is being introduced into the system. There's not as much wind. Wind blows at night, so there's not as much to offset it. The other thing is people's habits are changing. So our commercial buildings are getting more energy efficient. People have really invested a lot in keeping, partly prompted by the time of use. People are investing more in reducing their demand at the time. And we're coming home, and what's happened in our homes over the last 10 years is just the sheer number of devices that when people get home, what do you do? What's the first thing you do when you get home with this? Right? You charge it, right? What's the first thing your kids do when they get home from school? What? They go online, they fire up the Xbox, they, the cable box, the flat screen TV, which uses a whole lot more than energy than the old TV. Okay, so no, you don't do it. What do? You do your homework first, right? There you go, and then you fire up the Xbox, right? So, so what has happened is this peak is real, and so what's going to happen in March is that all of that peak time is changing, and it's sort of required for commercial customers because they're already on the time of use rates. For residential customers who are already on time of use rates, those hours will also shift. But those, for residential customers on time of use rates, those are optional. They're not automatic. You can opt out of them if you're already on them. Okay, so what's going to happen come 2020? If Edison is successful in upgrading its billing system, which is in the middle of a multi-hundreds of millions of dollars upgrade to its billing system right now, it's called CSRP. They will also, per the PUC, automatically put all residential customers on time of use rates. And we, Clean Power Alliance, are going to be faced with a decision about do we follow that path, or do we hold on to a more optionality around time of use rates or not? Versus tiered rates. Well, yeah, versus tiered rates. Now, there's pros and cons to this. One is, if we hold back and we say, no, it remains optional, we're going to be in this weird system of you're going to be charged time of use rates by Edison for your delivery charges, and maybe flat rates or tiered rates by buy Clean Power Alliance for your generation, like it's, like, people's heads are going to explode, right? So that's just from a customer simplicity perspective, one of the things that we're going to have to think about. The other thing we're going to have to think about is like what's good for the long-term issue around energy affordability and the transition to the clean energy economy in a way that works for everyone. And if we can send price signals to reduce demand at those high energy cost times, then and incentivize people to be installing batteries, we're gonna, collectively maybe be okay. But it's gonna be different for every individual customer, and it's it's not great for the solar customer. It might be great for the person who's got a really low energy use. So I don't know how this is going to shake out, but the state through the IOUs is definitely on that path, and we're next year as we set rates, we're going to have to figure that out. Are we going to stay? Are we going to decouple? Or are we going to just decouple a few of them? Try out. We'll see.
Thank you. Two other things too
Yeah,
that came to
sure.
mind. I was wondering if CPA lowers the overall demand on Edison, thus reducing potential blackouts, and if CPA will disclose the percentages of where the clean energy is coming from.
Yeah. So on the first thing is we are held to the same reliability requirements and guidelines. They're not guidelines. They're like under the penalty of law and super huge fines for introducing as much electricity into the California Independent System Operator as is necessary to meet our load. In fact, we have to have available capacity of 115% of our expected load in case we miscalculated and so is Edison and all load serving entities in the state. So there will be enough power. Us reducing the amount or increasing the amount just means Edison has to buy less, but it's still going to be 115% of that less. So it shouldn't have an impact on the reliability equation. So that's the first piece. The second piece is yes, we will be disclosing where we get our power from. First, we disclose on the power content label what our overall where we're getting stuff, but then in terms of the particular locations, as we sign those long-term contracts, every one of those locations becomes a matter of the public record and the size and all of that. I'll say that of those first 9 projects, all of them were in California. The project we signed, the wind energy deal, was on the Kern County, LA border. All those wind turbines you see if you're driving up to Mammoth. On 3, where 395 and the 14 split, that's where we got our first project from.
First of all, full disclosure, I am a council member sitting on the city council now, and I was on the council when we voted to go to the Clean Power Alliance. I was one of 2 council members who voted against it, and my comments are no disrespect to my fellow council members or to you. Mm-hmm. When you were showing us some statistics and percentages, mm-hmm. I think the assumption was that we have a very well-informed residents about this whole business, and you were looking at those statistics that way. Mm-hmm. I would make the statement that many, many people in this city have no idea we've gone to this, even though we passed this in November of 2017. And it will be a great surprise to them when they get their first bill with the additional piece in there about you buying power for them because they had to go in and they have to opt out. Mm-hmm. They have no idea. So those statistics may change a lot depending on which one of us or what percentage of those people are really well informed. Mm-hmm. Second thing is, I think you kind of alluded to the fact that being competitive, this whole situation was being driven by the competition, where I'll just make the statement, Senate Bill 100 actually mandates that Edison go to 33% clean power by 2020, 50% by 2026, 60% by 2030, and 100% by 2045. Then my final statement is, you mentioned contracts of $1 billion over 15 years. And I just don't know how you can guard against the risk of those long-term contracts and the liability a city might have, or the consortium of 31 cities, if this all goes south. Because we went through a change many years ago to deregulating electricity, which did go south. So it seems to me a large, large liability that I don't know how you can protect against that risk. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Mr. Schroeder said. I was at the meeting a couple of years ago. I think it was a Sustainable Claremont meeting where the process was explained before the council voted. I followed that. And even having been aware at that level, I may be just declaring that I'm the most ignorant person in the room, but the only thing I know of that I received was a postcard that was very busy with lots of languages, and if you went to the bottom of the back of it, there was something about you can choose your rate, and it was one of those things that I expected more would come. And so I'll add to Mr. Schroeder's comments a question of what do you intend to do to inform the public of a version of what you taught us tonight about how this works, not just how to read the bill, but what's the deal for anybody who wants to understand it. And I don't know anybody who's been talking about this or aware of it, and I think people will want to know. So please do comment on what you expect to do in customer information and education.
So thank you for the question. I agree that our first notices were not, we didn't put our best foot forward there, and own that, and want to sort of apologize for not being. It's not like we weren't transparent. It's just we didn't do the best with those notices. I think a lot of folks ended up throwing them in the trash, and that's not their fault. That's just the way things work. Sometimes I'm learning that a lot of what comes in the mail, I've sort of thought about it myself. So our post-enrollment notices for those who didn't opt out, some of you may have gotten them. I think they're a lot clearer. They have the rate options are staring you in the face. The opt-out procedures are, it's well explained right up there, and not in the fine print, but in the big print. And I think that what we've seen is that the folks who do choose to opt out are finding the process, whether it's through the call center or on the website, have found that process to be relatively simple and effective. So we will start getting, so folks who are, who may be caught unawares, there's still 2 more mailings coming out, and they will have an opportunity at that point. Well, they have an opportunity to change their rate at any time, and still have the opportunity to opt out also at any time. The thing that I would like to note to people is that if you wait for 2 billing cycles, 60 days, and you haven't opted out, and then you decide to opt out, it gets a little bit more complicated. And so what happens after the 60 days is that when you opt out, you have another 2 options. One is to immediately go back to Edison, but you go on what's called a transitional rate. And the transitional rate is based more on market prices than on the rate you were on before. And the transitional rate lasts for 6 months. And then you go back to the rate that you were on, Or when you opt out after the 60 days, you can choose to stay with us for 6 more months, and then go back to the exact rate that you were on with Edison. So for folks who are in that situation, and it takes, the first bills are coming, and I'm also very interested, in seeing what happens when those first bills come. But for folks for whom it takes a while longer and they still want to opt out, my recommendation is to opt out and opt down, and keep the lower rate for the 6 months, and then go back to the rate that you were on with Edison. You will see at the end of that 6 months, you will see your bills go up because our lowest rate is cheaper, but that's a choice, and that would be my recommendation. Finally, in terms of getting the word out more, we'll be out talking to businesses. We're not sort of stopping at enrollment. This is an ongoing process. We're building an organization here, and we're going to be out in the community talking to folks, doing forums like this, and trying to get as many people informed as we can. Yes?
Will you be at Farmers Market on Sunday?
I don't think we're going to be there this Sunday, but we'd be happy to come out to the farmers market. We know that that's a place where a lot of engaged folks go. It's a popular thing in this community, so we'd be happy for an invitation.
Are there other questions? I have one or two when the time comes.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed that Edison didn't show up. Let's assume that you're Edison.
Okay.
What would they have said, or what would be their philosophy?
Yep. Wow. So they have come to other events, and actually, a couple of their executives and we have our routine. But I do want to recognize that the legal piece that was talked about, that's real. They are governed by a code of conduct, and they're not. And what that code of conduct basically says is they're not allowed to market against us. And so I also try to be fair and not market against them, because also remember, our customers are their customers too. So that's sort of the kumbaya piece, is that we have, together with Edison, everybody's customer, whether you're a Clean Power Alliance customer for generation or an Edison customer for generation, we're all sort of linked here. So that's the first piece, and they're clearly interested in choice, because that's the way the market is going and the electricity system is going, and they putting solar panels up is a choice, and they've supported that for a long time. I think Edison's a big place, and I think that on different issues we have more commonalities, and on other issues we don't. I think in the regulatory space we have less commonality, because they're regulated by these 5 people appointed by the governor in San Francisco, and we're regulated by local elected officials. And so that's a culture clash that I think is probably never fundamentally to be resolved. Where we do have common ground, and this makes us fundamentally very different than the Northern California CCAs and whatever CCA starts to appear in SDG&E territory. We and Edison are both electricity-only companies. We have a common goal to reduce the use of fossil fuels. That is unusual when you have PG, the gas, and DG, the gas. Those two organizations are a little bit more sort of conflicted about what their corporate goals are. With us and Edison, we're pretty much in alignment that we want to reduce the use of fossil fuels, reduce the use of oil in cars and gas in buildings, and that's the future. So I think as we get through this transition, and we find that common ground, you'll see us be doing a lot more partnerships with Edison than you see the Northern California CCAs do with PG&E for that fundamental reason.
Given that the next biggest event will be the Pie Festival, possibly a booth or some sort of a talking station.
Pie Festival.
Yes, and the chair of the Pie Festival, okay, well, the very large CEO of over here, yeah, I think you would have hundreds and hundreds of people to tap upon for the Pie Festival to be there to answer questions.
Thank you, thank you. I'm learning, we have 31 cities that have joined Clean Power Alliance, right? And I've sort of learned that, you've seen one. And I'm learning about every different community is real, everybody's got their version of the Pie Festival, and one of the things that we're doing is we're learning about what that key moment in the community is where we can touch as many people as possible. So thank you for that.
Any other questions? I do have one.
Yeah.
I think I read that hydroelectric power is not considered to be green power. Is that correct?
So it depends on the kind of hydroelectric. What we call large hydro, which is over 30 megawatts or more, is considered carbon-free, but not renewable. And that's a definition by the state of California to try to not promote the construction of big new dams. And most hydro that is less than 30 megawatts, which does count as renewables, are what's called run-of-the-river projects, where they actually don't create the big reservoir, but they take the dams. So less than 30 megawatts renewable, more than 30 megawatts not, but it's all carbon-free, and we do buy some large hydro to top up our carbon-free percentages in addition to the renewable energy.
Another question I had, of the companies that you're making contracts with, for instance, you mentioned 9. Can you give us some idea of what sort of outfits those are and how they generate their energy?
Yeah. So the contracts that I mentioned in terms, those would be for new renewable energy projects, new steel in the ground. That's on top of what we're buying in the short-term market to meet all of our load and the existing renewable energy that we buy. So the short-term renewable energy that we buy right now is coming from the existing wind farms, the existing solar plants that you see across California. We're getting we get wind from the stuff that goes out to Palm Springs. The companies that we're looking to sign projects with, some of them are household names and some of them may not be known. But what they all are is they're experienced renewable energy developers. So they're folks who have a track record of building successful projects in the state of California. And of supplying the state with renewable energy. We're right now in negotiations, so I'm not allowed to say the names. When we get to the stage of the board approval, then we release the names of the companies. But there, you will again, some of them are brand names, and some of them are folks who maybe the largest renewable energy developers in the state, but you've never heard of them because they don't have a retail business.
I don't know if you want to comment on
Yeah.
this, but I've gotten some solicitations from Arcadia Power that generates energy from wind across the country. Is that a potential source, or are you focused on in California?
We're focused on in California, and what Arcadia is doing is it's buying the renewable energy certificates from those wind projects and marketing them separate from the energy. And that's an important distinction. We don't use that's called an unbundled REC. So it's a renewable energy certificate that is divorced from the energy. We don't use unbundled RECs. Every bit of renewable energy that we buy, every REC we have, is actually backed by power. And so the Arcadias, and there are others that what they're marketing is the unbundled RECs. And we're a power company, so we sell power and don't use that kind of REC.
And if I may be allowed one more question.
Yeah.
Do you foresee investing in technologies that may be developing, encouraging, that sort of thing? I have in mind, for instance, I heard about the energy storage that's from excess solar or whatever, that's stored by hauling up big concrete blocks and then lowering them down. It's called the energy vault. And it can apparently be at a scale that can provide energy for a large area. Would you encourage that sort of thing?
So right now, the storage that we would be investing in is battery storage because it's proven and well-known, and we can actually pair it directly with the solar. The other storage that we're seeing, that has a good track record is pumped hydro.
Yes.
But there's not a lot of it, and those are very, very, very large investments.
Well, this is pumped concrete.
Pumped concrete. We also have the trains. I don't know if you've heard about the
Yeah,
trains
yeah,
where they haul
right.
the trains up the hill and then they
But
run
you
them
need a
down.
hill.
But you need a hill. For the pump storage, you need the water.
Right.
And then there's compressed air storage, which is using old salt caverns or old decommissioned mines to put air into it and compress it and use the excess energy to compress the air and then release it to turn a turbine. My view of a lot of this is I'm interested in innovation. I'm not so interested in bleeding edge because we have unless the state legislature says you got to go invest in that. I'm more interested in trying to, if we're going to try new stuff, I'd like to try new stuff small and in our communities rather than make a huge big bet on some untried mega infrastructure project. I think that's where folks can go wrong, and I think that folks would also like to see the innovation in the community. And so I'm more interested in some of these smaller scale distributed things where if we can pair up the batteries and that kind of thing is sort of at least more interesting to me trying to run this thing than sort of some huge infrastructure piece that I'm not sure has the value over the long term.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I knew if I took long enough, there'd be some more.
Ted, thank you so much. I just wanted to sort of be so bold as to piggyback on your apology in terms of getting the word out, because as an alliance and as a part of a local alliance, and as part of the city does have a certain obligation to let our residents know and to feel obliged to help each other understand about this opportunity. to participate in being a part of lowering our carbon footprint. So I think that as it rolls out, we could do a much better job, like all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Did I hear you say that Edison is also not just hoping, but is almost mandated that by a certain date, they're hoping to be 100% fossil-free?
So there's a couple of pieces here. So they have their own internal corporate goal called their Clean Energy Pathway, where they want to be 80% carbon-free or 80% clean by 2030. So that's an internal corporate goal. It's not a state mandate. The state mandate is that by 2030, they have, by 2020, that 33% of their energy come from renewable sources, and that by 2030, that be 60%. And we're held to that same regulatory standard. 60% of our energy has to be from renewables by 2030. If all holds, we'll be there in 2019 or 2020. So you may ask, what's the difference between carbon-free and renewables? And I think this is some of where the differentiation starts to take place. Carbon-free includes the large hydro. It also includes nuclear energy. And we don't procure nuclear energy. So much of what we're about is expanding that renewables investment rather than relying on the legacy nuclear plants. And then we're all supposed to, by 2045, this was SB 100, be 100% clean. 60% of that is going to be renewables, and 40% of that is going to be carbon-free of some sort. And that's what a lot of the policy debate will be about, sort of as we get into the 2020s. What does carbon-free mean? Is that renewable? Is that including nuclear? Is that including fossil fuels and then some carbon sequestration, some other kinds of technologies? 2045 is a ways away, and we'll see some development by then.
So my question is, if that's the case, and the 20s are heading right toward us, then what will happen to a company, an alliance such as yours, if the big competitor is able to provide much of what we're looking for?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is we're moving faster. So Edison has basically already met its 2020 goals. So they have put a pause on renewable energy development because our customer base is saying, through their choices, saying we would like, some of them saying 100, some of them saying 50, some of them saying 36. In aggregate, we're hearing from our customers that we need to have 60% renewables, almost double what Edison has today. So we're going to have to invest. And so part of this is, race to the top and moving faster to decarbonize. So I think that's one differentiation. And then the second differentiation is going to be what are those investments? And to the point about being in the local communities, much of the decision about where to invest and what projects to invest in that the investor-owned utilities have is subject to the decisions in San Francisco by the Public Utilities Commission. So all of their procurement, they have to run through that, and that's a slow process, and they often don't necessarily make I think if Edison were here, they'd say, there's some projects we'd love to invest in, but they won't let us. And so I think some of, in addition to the speed of decarbonization, we're going to be a little bit more nimble about the kinds of investments we make to match them.
And you anticipate longevity.
Oh yeah, I mean, so like at the size that we're at, I think a lot about what like my sort of role as a CEO right now, in addition to starting up and getting us launched, is I'm thinking about, we're building an institution here that's going to be here for a long, long time. And I'm thinking about like, what kind of governance structures do we put in place so that, in a decade or 2 decades, when I'm no longer here, that we're still here. I think this is about building an institution, a public institution that is governed well. We'll go through our challenges. But it's certainly not like we're in and out of this. We're procuring power right now out until 2024. We're going to be signing long-term contracts that get us out into, 15 years. I think about that almost every day, in addition to like the day-to-day things about the rollout, is how can I put strong risk management structures and governance structures in place to make sure that this not only survives but thrives.
Ted and Jennifer, I want to thank you very much for coming out here and being so helpful to us.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
I also want to point out that there were 4 of the 5 city council people here this evening: Jennifer Stark, Larry Schroeder, Corey Kalaikai, and Jed Liano was here at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you all.